is a brilliant story and a prize winner, so there's nothing wrong with those. But I wonder what it is when you're writing such a story that turns you to what we might call the meta story. What is it that you know about the story as it's going along that makes you realize I need a narrator here who's a writer or Gordonian in some other way? I'm going to move this real close.
Just a little detail about City Life, which I find very poignant. It was chosen for a prize by David Foster Wallace. And I always thought,
Henry.
Yeah, that David Foster Wallace and I, our work is so different. Why would he ever even pay attention to me? I always thought he would think I was, this old, boring, not hip like him. And I was very moved by his having chosen that. So that leads into what I think is important to me, why I sometimes will do something that's called a meta story. I really want to reject the dividing lines between approaches in fiction, schools of fiction. Somebody's a realist, somebody's a fabulist. It seems to me the important thing is to be most porous to whatever the story wants to be. And so when you say to me, how do I decide? I don't. I hear it. And so, for example, with the story intertextuality, it was almost like an accident given to me. For many years, I read Proust every morning. For about 10 years, I read 5 pages of Proust every morning. So I read À la recherche du temps perdu 6 times completely.
Why?
Because I wanted to know it well.
So and it was pure, also, literary study in a way.
And also, when you read Proust, it's like you have another life. It's not like reading another book. It's, and anyway, I was reading my Proust for that morning, and I came upon the word summer house, and I associated to something that my grandmother had done, 50 years before, and I thought, these postmodernist critics who write in a language that gives me a gigantic headache because it's so obscuring and so untransparent. I thought this is what they are really talking about when they say words like intertextuality, which actually doesn't mean anything. And I thought, how does my reading of Proust flow in and out of my writing, my own history? How do all those come together? And so it's not like I decided to do it. They just came.
Well,
and that story was actually very easy.
There. When you I know that we talked yesterday about how these things there's more of a calling than a will. But there are options, narrative options. Forget about Mary Gordon for a second. Well, we won't forget about Mary Gordon, but leaving your own approach aside, short story writer X could have said, I've had a Proustian thing. Now I'll write a story about a summer house that doesn't mention Proust. Mm-hmm. That's an option. Mm-hmm. You chose rather to include in it the whole device of getting yourself started, which is Proustian.
Yeah.
Not only Proust, but Proustian.
So
that's a decision.
I guess sometimes... And for this story, I need to tell 3 stories and talk about love and death. I could have written that very straightforwardly. But sometimes it seems to me it's too flat. Right. It makes the subject smaller than I want it to be.
Right.
And there's a kind of, for example, writing about the immigrant experience now, which just seems very flat. And it's like, this is what my grandmother did. Thanks. I've heard that. And I wanted to kind of bounce the story of an immigrant woman out of that, out of the limits of what I think would be a flattening if I just told the story, isn't this touching, isn't this poignant, and to make it part of literature. Because for me, literature and life are very seamless. So that was what I wanted to do.
So in intertextuality, when you have a title like that, readers look for 2 at least. One is Proust, and the other, I take it, is the story that's being told in
Life.
Your story.
Yeah.
Okay. So I want to lead up to asking you to read the end of that story, which I mentioned to you, I would ask you, and I love the story, I love the ending of it. But maybe we could talk a little more about it so that everyone here is up to speed on it. So the trigger is Summer House, and your grandmother has never really had a vacation. She's now 80. And she goes to Florida, and while she's away, her family redoes her house entirely. Which, I don't know, there's a reality show about this, right? You show up back again, and either you're like, oh, this is always what I always wanted, or in the grandmother's case, she's horrified.
Yeah.
And then there's also a memory of her coming to you with ridiculous sort of screens, claiming she's going to build you or build the granddaughter a summer house.
Yeah. And then after I tell that sort of whatever realism is, that sort of realistic story about my grandmother, the house, the screens, the summer house, I go back to Proust, and I then put my grandmother into Proust. So
it's fantastic. I think it's page 62. And so you're about to hear the end of intertextuality when the narrator returns to Proust.
Okay, so after there's this debacle about the summer house, which will not be built, the words summer house were not mentioned again. And it's been 35 years since I've thought of them. Only Proust's words brought them back to me, his descriptions of the dinner in Trouville. And this is Proust. A few hours later, during dinner, which naturally was served in the dining room, the lights would be turned on even when it was still quite light out of doors, so that one saw before one's eyes, in the garden, among summer houses glimmering in the twilight like pale specters of evening, arbors whose glaucous verdure was pierced by the last rays of the setting sun. I am finishing dinner alone at my table in a restaurant in Trouville, among women in pink-tinted gauzy dresses, languidly lifting ices to their lips, or grapes. The men are in frock coats, indolently lighting cigarettes. The champagne is returned, pronounced undrinkable. The young waiter reddens, scurries backward, produces the crestfallen maître d'. Outside, the sea laps in the distance. The shore is phosphorescent. Glowworms flicker in the arbor. Night flowers open, scent the air, retreat. Women rise slowly. Men take their arms. No need to hurry. No need really to do anything. Excuse me. No need to hurry. No need really to do anything but make one's way to bed, a dream perhaps of the sun on the ocean or a white sail against blue. And then my grandmother enters in her stern shoes, old lady shoes, black low-heeled Oxfords, a version of which she wears in all seasons and for all occasions. Her legs are thick in their elastic stockings, the color of milky coffee. She wears them for her varicose veins. Her house dress has a pattern of faded primroses. An apron is pinned to the bodice. Her ring sinks into the fourth finger of her square, mannish hands. My grandmother doesn't know where to place herself in this company. For them, she has only contempt. She is calculating, with a professional's knowledgeable eye, the cost of the gowns, the wastage of good food implied in every half-emptied dish on the exhausted table. She knows that she is saved and they are lost, that she is right and they are wrong, that she is wise and they are foolish. Or does she? Is she perhaps not judging, but yearning? Is she adoring those light, slow-moving people with their empty hands, their lovely skins, their high, impractical limbs, their shoes that could take them nowhere? Perhaps she is not my grandmother, that is to say, not an old woman, but a young girl. Her bones are delicate and long. The skin of her hands is bluish-white, transparent. She is hoping that one of them will say, "What a pretty child. Perhaps she'd join us for an ice." And she will sit with them in a summer house, eating an ice, pistachio, lemon, perhaps in the shape of something, a flower or a bird. They will ask her about herself, and she will say nothing, because she knows that would spoil everything. She will shake her head, refusing words, lifting the spoon from her dish to her lips, silent, happy, very happy, thinking perhaps of the word glaucus, with nothing asked of her and nothing that she needs to do.